healthcare strategist Seth Denson. He is president and co-founder of GDP Advisors. And before that, he was a consultant for both firms and organizations that top the Fortune 500. The website, gdpadvisors.com. Mr. Denson, good to have you with us tonight.
Jim, always good to be with you.
Thank you very much. All right. The cost of healthcare keeps on rising, and there's been a new report from researchers at the Commonwealth Fund who added up the cost of health insurance with the size of deductibles, and there's some disturbing information there. The combined cost of insurance premiums and deductibles nationwide is about $7,240, or about 11.7% of income. That was as of 2017. A decade earlier, it was only 7.8% of the median income. So that's merely quantifying what I think we all pretty much know intuitively, and that is that anything regarding health, the cost is going up faster than I can keep up. Why?
Well, there's a number of factors that are playing into this, I believe, and our research is showing the same, which is that if you think about it, if we go back in time, prior to the Affordable Care Act, in the 10 years leading up to the ACA's passage, the inflation rate of health care was roughly 136% in those 10 years. At the same time, the overall inflation of our GDP was about 28%, and workers' earnings were about 35%. So healthcare has been increasing at a rate that has been unsustainable and eventually would get to a position where we could no longer manage these costs. And so that was the reasoning behind the Affordable Care Act, and understandable why they tried to do something. Mm-hmm. The problem that was caused by the Affordable Care Act is while the intentions were good, what the Affordable Care Act did is it primarily focused on the health insurance marketplace. Well, health insurance is just the financing mechanism of the healthcare system. And so if we think about it from an analogy perspective, think about it like I'm squeezing a balloon. Well, if I'm squeezing a balloon, I'm not taking any air out of anything. I'm just moving the air around. And I'm really putting pressure on other areas. And unfortunately, what we've seen is families have actually seen the biggest burden because deductibles are going up to offset the increase in cost, which puts more burden on employees because they're having to meet those deductibles before they receive benefits. And then they're also seeing rate increases because health care costs continue to go up, and when health care costs go up, the financing mechanism, which is health insurance premiums, also go up. And so this is the place that we have found ourselves in right now at the beginning of 2019, 10 years since the passage of the Affordable Care Act almost. Hard to believe that. But this is where we are, and until we start to drive down the cost of health care, health insurance, and deductibles and burdens on families, it's just going to continue to go up.
Now, of course, a number of other countries, the ones with whom we would like to be compared, say the developed countries of Western Europe and elsewhere, they just flat slap on price controls. You can only charge so much for this procedure. You can charge so much for that drug. In particular, pharmaceuticals. I have long advocated a passage of a fairly simple law, and that is that drug manufacturers may not charge more for a drug in the United States than they charge overseas. This is a market that is far too big for any pharmaceutical company to ignore, and they would be forced to have other countries start paying their share of things like the research and development that goes into making drugs. And yes, what has been historically a high profit margin for the drug companies as well. But that's what happens. The drug companies are held down by such price controls in other countries, but they say, hey, the sky is the limit in the good old U.S. of A., and we've been paying for the deadbeats in Europe.
No question, and I am not going to start defending the large pharmaceutical industry. However, we've created this problem. Our regulatory system and the way it's structured, it takes on average 12 years and about $2 billion to bring a drug to market in the United States. That's the cost of red tape, research, development, testing, and all of that. In addition, the U.S. government doesn't allow testing in foreign markets into the U.S., so you could have a westernized country like Great Britain doing a lot of great research and studies on pharmaceuticals, but unfortunately the FDA doesn't allow that into the United States. And so because of that, oftentimes it's the U.S. citizen and taxpayer that's paying the bottom line profit margin for the pharmaceutical company, and then the foreign markets who have price control, who are getting to free ride on us, the U.S. citizens, well, they're getting to pay for top-line growth for these organizations. And so this is the challenge that we're in, and it is I'm all for your idea of let's charge it across the board. What we've got to do, though, otherwise we won't see any advancement in medicine, is we've got to soften the requirements of the FDA, loosen some of the red tape, and allow drugs to get to market faster, and the free market system to work. The free market system works best when we have competition, and right now there's few companies that can afford to compete on 12 years and $2 billion.
Yeah, 1-866-50-JIMBO, our number, 1-866-505-4626. We're talking with Seth Denson. He's the president and co-founder of GDP Advisors, and that's the website, their name, gdpadvisors.com. What do you do at GDP Advisors? What's the point of the company?
Yeah, so we're a healthcare market analyst and strategy firm, and our typical clients are corporate employees, or employers, I apologize. Roughly 50% of Americans in the United States are getting their access to the healthcare system through their employers' health insurance plans. Those employers hire us to manage the assets of those plans so they're not just shelling out money on health insurance premiums.
Now then, how much of what we face in terms of healthcare costs is avoidable? I mean, if we are just stuck in a vortex of forces outside our control, then okay, I'm not going to rant and rave and try to turn back the incoming tide with a teaspoon. But if there are things we can do, then I'd like to know about them.
Absolutely, some things we can do. I always start out by saying there are 4 different influencers in the healthcare system. The first is the delivery system itself, right? Hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, doctors, and nurses. The second is the insurance company, those that finance the system. The third is Uncle Sam, the U.S. government, who regulates the system. But the fourth, who actually is oftentimes the most influential, is you and me as the consumer. The problem that we have and the challenge we face in the United States is the American consumer is usually a great consumer on everything except for health care. Now, part of that is because the healthcare system is convoluted and it's not very transparent. But we're culpable in this. On average, the American citizen spends 10 hours researching a car before they make that purchase, 2 hours researching a flat-screen TV, and 15 minutes when it comes to decisions surrounding their health care. We blindly trust people in lab coats. We think that the logo printed on that insurance ID card, that company has our best interest at heart, and we proceed without caution. And that insurance ID card is really more of a credit card, and eventually that balance becomes due. So we're culpable in all of this, and what you and I and every consumer out there can do is start to be better consumers, do research, ask questions, understand the system, and do our due diligence.
1-866-50-JIMBO, our number, 1-866-505-4626. And this is a chance to learn more about something that affects us all. We all have health of one type or another. If we don't pay attention to it, whatever health we have will not be as good as it would have been or could have been. And, of course, with that comes a price tag. 1-866-50-JIMBO with our guest, Seth Denson, president and co-founder of GDPadvisors.com. We'll be back in just a moment. We're talking with Seth Denson, president and co-founder of GDPadvisors.com, and with Linda, who calls in from Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Good evening, Linda.
Hi, good evening. How are you?
We're well, thank you.
I just wanted to make a couple of comments. I've been in healthcare for about 21 years, and I was very naive going in, but, I think a lot of people don't realize that this is a business, and it's a consumable product business, and their objective is not to cure anything, but to treat everything, because that's where the money is. And you have a lot of politicians who have passed a lot of laws that basically created a monopoly for this industry, which is why, you have the skyrocketing prices, because they don't have any competition, because any of their competition, they pretty much get the FDA after them and shut them down and, make their lives miserable. But, according to the CDC, the pharmaceutical healthcare industry, which I consider a sick care industry personally, it is the fourth leading killer of Americans. So, my question has always been, why does everybody need this health plan? Because, and you might say people are healthier these days. That's highly debatable. Cancer in the 1900s was like 1 in 100, and now it's like 1 in 3.
Yeah, but don't forget the average lifespan, Linda. I mean, let's face it, we live a lot longer than we used to, and we are also healthy and active a lot longer. My grandmothers sat in rocking chairs. They didn't rollerblade. So something is working.
Yeah, but there seems to be a trend going down because my grandfather and grandmother lived well into their 80s. My other grandmother lived to be about 93.
Well,
my parents died in their, 70s, so it's like 2-3 generations ago, my grandpa was like 90, and then the next generation, they passed away at 80. The next generation
nonetheless,
passed away at
that's
70.
a tad on the anecdotal side, and I want our guests to respond because for every person you can find like that, there were others who did not have such healthy lives. Although in recent years, I think it is probably true, Seth Denson, that we have seen a slight drop in the average lifespan, a slight drop, but overall, compared with a century ago, we live a lot longer and we live more active lives.
Yeah, listen, I think that most of us would agree. Nobody wants to go back to the days where polio was very rampant. And I think that modern medicine is advancing in a way that is positive. But to Linda's point, she's absolutely right when she says that there is a lot more money to be earned from the business side of healthcare in treating things rather than curing them. And that's just a sad reality. Oftentimes we talk about with our clients, and when I'm speaking at events, I'll talk about the conflict between capitalism and care. I'm a free market capitalist. I think that it's a free market system that ultimately will cure the woes of the healthcare system in the United States. If you don't have a free market system, we will stop advancing medicine. The United States is responsible for roughly 70% of the world's innovation and advancement when it comes to medicine. The rest of the world relies on us for that. And it's our free market system that does that. If we start to squash that and we take away the opportunity for profit out of the system, well, then we stop the opportunity for the advancement that we've seen thus far. Now, that said, there is a balance. You shouldn't take an IV bag that costs 88 cents to produce and allow hospitals to charge $600 for it. There is a structure here that we need to some parameters, and this is where Uncle Sam can regulate but not price set, not get in the business of managing healthcare, but set the parameters that we have a free market system that operates in a transparent manner so that the consumers can do just that. They can be consumers.
1-866-50-JIMBO is our number, 1-866-505-4626. And David calls in from Atlantic City, New Jersey. David, good evening. Welcome.
Hi, thanks. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
Just a comment and thought, and just to get some feedback. To what degree do you think that people's lifestyle contributes to healthcare costs?
Well, there's no doubt about the fact that a lot of our problems we bring on ourselves. I mean, goodness knows if we didn't eat too much and exercise too little, and in some cases drink too much. If in fact we lived perfect lives, Seth Denson, what could we cut? 2/3 of our healthcare costs?
Yeah, I think that's probably a pretty good assessment. We are responsible for a lot of it, and there's a lot of talk these days around behavioral health, right? The things that we do, stress levels, screen time, our inability to communicate effectively with one another, all this actually does play a role in our overall physical health. And so not only is the double cheeseburger or the non-light beer on a regular basis bad for us, but all of the other aspects that we include in our daily life from a behavioral aspect can have an impact on our physical health as well.
Yeah, no question about it. Call from Tom in Las Vegas on the Bohannon Show. Tom, good evening. Welcome.
Oh, hi. Hi, Jim. God bless you. And Kathy,
and
I believe your producer's name is.
That's right. That's correct.
God bless you all. Happy New Year. And I just wanted to mention the book Mary's Monkey by Edward Haslam. It's about those polio vaccines from the back in the 40s and 50s.
Well, the 50s.
They were contaminated with monkey viruses that caused cancer.
Before we get too far down the road of that, I'm unaware of any indication that the polio vaccines did anything other than save an awful lot of lives, Seth Denson.
Yeah, listen, I'm not familiar with the book referenced by Tom, but, I think that, again, any time we have medicine that's being advanced, there's going to be some that it didn't react well to or some issues with that along the way. But those are slim margins, and I think the vast majority of citizens in the world would say that curing polio is a good thing.
Are you an optimist or a pessimist about where healthcare costs are going to go? In other words, do we have the will to do what we need to do as a society?
I am an eternal optimist, my friend. You have to be if you're in healthcare on my side of things when you're trying to help the patient balance how to navigate the system. I am an eternal optimist. I will tell you, I've been encouraged by what I've seen the Trump administration do, from a perspective of how they're approaching the system. I think Alex Azar, a former drug executive, knows how the game is played and recognizes that if we can start to drive down the cost of healthcare, the whole system will operate better and will allow the consumers to be operating more effectively in a free market by requiring things like transparency in the system. January 1, hospitals had to start publishing their charge masters online, and we can have a long conversation about the value of that. But that's a good first step, requiring drug manufacturers to post their prices in their ads. These are things that are important that we can do. That doesn't mean the government's getting in the business of healthcare, but they're regulating it just like they regulate the highway system. I can go buy a car that drives 200 miles an hour, but Uncle Sam's not going to let me drive it 200 miles an hour down the highway. And we need to do the same thing with healthcare. We need to make sure that we regulate it in a way that makes it a fair and balanced system for all.
Fair enough. We'll pause on that note and be back with more calls in just a moment. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show at 1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. Looking at healthcare inflation and how high it is and how you survive that with Seth Denson, president and co-founder of GDP Advisors.com. Michael in Tallahassee, Florida calls in tonight. Hello, Michael.
Hello. I have one question, and then I would also have a comment about why it's difficult for people to be good health consumers. So my question is, did they finally get rid of balance billing? So, for example, you go to the hospital, and you make sure your hospital's a network and your doctor's a network, and you think everything should be okay. There was an article in the New York Times. This guy goes in for back surgery. Well, when you go into the hospital, you start getting bills from the anesthesiologist, the pathologist, the radiologist, and they're independent contractors, and they're out of network, and you have no say. And in this man's case, the surgeon used an assistant surgeon who was an independent contractor at the hospital. His surgeon billed like $9,000 for the surgery, but the assistant surgeon billed him $117,000, and he had no recourse. So I think that's called balance billing, and supposedly that was eliminated. Is that true?
No, sir. Not true at all. I wish it were. This is one of those things in the healthcare system that is just a thorn in the side of the healthcare system. And you're absolutely right. This is a common practice, and we're seeing it more and more where I go in for a procedure or someone goes in for a procedure, and you think you're in a network hospital and you've done your due diligence on the front end. And you come to find out that you saw 3 doctors that were out of network, 2 surgical assistants, a nurse, and a partridge in a pear tree. And at the end of the day, you get this massive balance bill that isn't covered by your insurance because it wasn't either pre-approved or a covered procedure. This is an unfortunate side of healthcare right now, and one of those areas that I think the government does need to step in and regulate.
I mean, why is this not done? I mean, goodness knows, no member of Congress is going to lose votes over that.
You know, Jen, I can't answer that, and this is one thing that we lobby for all the time, and we just don't get clear answers. You talk to a single congressman or congresswoman, and you're going to hear, oh, yes, we would be in support of doing away with that. Well, if you're in support of it, do it. And they don't, unfortunately. And the only thing I can say, and this is the cynic in me, is that the healthcare lobby in Washington is larger than tobacco, guns, defense combined. And,
yeah, but the thing of it is, all the
we just don't see the needle moving.
All the healthcare lobby can do is provide money. If they're providing money for you to commit electoral suicide, that doesn't add up to anything. I don't understand the power of that. I mean, if you are on record as voting against stopping this kind of process, if you've got anything approaching a competent opponent in the election, either the primary or the general, you're going to get killed. This is unconscionable, and there's no reason.
If we had it, if it actually got brought to a vote on the floor, and we could get some legislators on record voting for or against this, that would be great. Unfortunately, nobody's even proposing it as a bill. I mean, this is one of those things that I just, for the life of me, can't understand why this isn't a commonality. This is a consumer protection that should be involved in everything. The other thing I'll tell you right now is that emergency rooms throughout the United States today are no longer, many of them, staffing the doctors with in-network doctors. It's an emergency. If I go there, it's not because I have time to shop. It's because I'm in pain or injured or worse. And so I go in, I have my treatment done, and 3 months down the road, I get a $4,000 bill from out-of-network doctors, and I have no recourse. And that is a really sad state that we're in right now. We must do something about it.
All right, 1-866-50-JIMBO, our number, 1-866-505-4626. This is Sharon in Crane, Missouri. Hello, Sharon.
Hello, Jim, and hello to your guest. There is something else, too, that is going on. The insurance companies are having a great deal to say about what is the standard level for different diseases. It's like sugar for diabetes. It used to be that if your sugar ran ordinarily after you were tested over a 3-month period, they got your average. If you were running 120 on an average, you were considered good. Now, because the insurance companies have put pressure on the doctors, they have pushed that down to below 100, and it is sometimes dangerous for individuals who get below 100. But this is a way to continue keeping the person taking different medications. The drug industry is benefiting by this. The insurance companies are benefiting by this. So it's not just one thing. It is the whole system that is a mess.
Thoughts on that, Seth Denson?
Well, Sharon's right, and the problem that we're seeing more and more of, and again, this is an area where we need Uncle Sam to step in and do a little bit more regulation. So specific to the drug question, insurance companies prior to the Affordable Care Act were in conflict with the hospital systems and the drug manufacturers. They fought against one another. Today they don't. You want to talk about collusion, I can spell it for you. This is what we're seeing, because what happens is, and this is a very important part that your listeners need to understand, drugs in the United States are not sold from the manufacturer to the consumer directly. There are middlemen called pharmacy benefit managers, or PBMs. Roughly 80% of all drugs in the United States are distributed by one of 3 PBMs. All 3 PBMs of those 3 are owned by insurance companies. So the insurance company who is paying the claim is actually getting spiffed on the back end based on how many drugs you consume. So Sharon's right. It is in the insurance company's best interest to have you on more drugs rather than get you feeling better or doing things naturally.
1-866-50-JIMBO, our number, and we'll be back with more calls in just a moment. GDPadvisors.com regarding healthcare inflation in this country. We go to Debbie, who listens to us over WMIX Radio in Mount Vernon, Illinois. Hello, Debbie.
Hi. I had a question, Mr. Jimbo and Seth. I was wondering, I'm on something called Health Scope with my job, and I can get something called Singular. It's generic, or Monoleucus. It's generic Singular. but I could get it for $1.96 for 30 pills. My husband doesn't have any insurance. We go on GoodRx or we'll go on Kroger, and it's like $10 or $14.
You're talking about a wide difference in price for a given drug.
For the same thing, yeah, for the same thing. Like he was talking about PBMs. I was wondering what that was because I was trying to find out, is there another place that we could be calling to find out if we can get the same pill for around a lot less, because it's crazy.
Well, go ahead.
Debbie, you have, if you said you're with HealthScope's a third-party administrator, likely through your employer, I would assume, is who you're getting that through. And likely you're getting a lower cost because your employer is subsidizing that through their contract agreement with the PBM that is utilized through HealthScope. Versus, it sounded like, I think if I heard you right, your husband is not utilizing an insurance policy, rather going and buying it. Now, I would say that you're on the right track, and you know, Debbie just gave a great tidbit to your listeners, Jim, when she mentioned a company called GoodRx. I talk all the time about people being a better consumer. GoodRx is a great free resource to do just that. You can look up any drug. It will tell you the pharmacies in your area that cover that drug, what their cost is, and if there are even coupons and alternatives for non-name brand generic alternatives. It's a great resource, and I would encourage your listeners to use that.
As we go to some more calls here, the term generic drugs, is there any difference between a generic drug and a brand name drug? I've heard some say that in fact, that often to avoid patent infringement, that there are minor differences.
Yeah, so typically the chemical components in makeup have to be extremely similar. There's not going to be a patent infringement typically when you see a generic come out, because that means that the patent is expired on the drug. Now, if you do have a generic alternative or a biosimilar that comes out while a drug is still under a patent or a patent extension, that's one thing. But usually when you get to the world of generics, you're looking at a chemical component that is almost identical, if not identical, to the original brand name version.
1-866-50-JIMBO, 1-866-505-4626. We have a call, I believe, from Tanner, somewhere in Kansas. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, well, very good. Go right ahead, Tanner.
All right. So I have a question for you in regards to, I know it's a total situational question, but the question is, Medicare Advantage plan with prescription drug coverage versus A, B, and D. I know that it probably, personally, I work for CMS as a customer service representative.
I'm sorry. Before you go any further, what were those initials and what do they stand for?
For the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services.
Okay, and what exactly? And again, just so we all are with you here, what exactly is that? I just don't know.
So the Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services is basically when you call the number on the back of your Medicare card, it's 1-800-MEDICARE, 633-4227.
Okay.
And through this open enrollment period that we just went through in October, from October 15th through December 7th, people can change their prescription drug plans, or they can enroll in a Medicare Advantage plan.
Okay.
And now we're in Medicare, what's called from January 1st through March 31st, what's called the Medicare Advantage plan open enrollment period, where people who got enrolled in the Medicare Advantage plan are finding out that not necessarily due to market misrepresentation, but they're finding out that their HMOs don't have, like, their doctors aren't in their HMO network. And even some, I've noticed that some beneficiaries are even getting rejected by certain PPOs as well.
Again, I'm sorry, what was the last set of initials?
PPO. It's a preferred provider organization.
Okay, yeah. Again,
So
I'm sure that our guest understands that, but the rest of us need to as well. So,
sure. Sorry about that.
Okay. All right.
My question for the advisor on the other end of the line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
The thing is that a lot of people that are enrolling in Medicare Advantage plans don't realize, and it's a partial question to get an opinion.
Okay.
But it's also too that a lot of people that are enroll in Medicare Advantage plans don't realize that it's not. The way that I look at it is that the Medicare system is more or less kind of shoving off the handling claims like they used to, onto the different plans themselves. And when the beneficiaries enroll in such plans, they're incurring costs like co-pays and such like that, where it's no longer the 80-20 rule.
All right. Well, let's let our guest comment on something that we have to comment on now. Seth?
Well, and again, I don't know that I fully understand where Tanner was going with that, but there are differences, obviously, between Medicare Advantage and the true Medicare Part A, B, and D. Part A being the hospitalization aspect of the benefits of the Medicare system, Part B being your physician benefits, and Part D being the prescription drug benefits that we saw brought to the marketplace under the Bush 43 administration. Medicare Advantage are supplemental options available outside the scope of A, B, and D, and are typically managed by a traditional insurer, a United Healthcare or an Aetna. And, what I would tell your listeners is what I would tell Tanner is, the Advantage plans aren't bad, at least from my perception, but everything has a fit for what your need is, and it's the responsibility of everybody. I go back to what I said earlier. Americans spend 15 minutes on average when assessing their health care needs and what to do about it. Americans need to do more research, ask more questions. And I would always encourage people, ask more than one person. Don't just ask one insurance agent or broker. Talk to multiple folks and find out information from all sides so that you can have the information you need to make the best decision for you and your family.
More to come, back in a moment. Welcome back to the Jim Bohannon Show, 1-866-50-JIMBO. We're talking with Seth Denson, president and co-founder of GDP Advisors, and also with Rob, who calls in from Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Hello, Rob, and welcome. Good to have you on.
Thank you, Jimbo.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year. Happy New Year to you.
Mm-hmm.
And same to you, Seth. My question is, earlier you had said that Seth had said that the majority of the drug research is done in the United States. But my parents were on many drugs, and not too long ago, and they were told to get them through the mail, order them through Canada. And we get a lot of Canadians down in Myrtle Beach on vacation. I'm originally from New Jersey. And they talk like everything is the greatest in the world up in Canada as far as drugs go and their medical care.
Well, they're talking about the price involved. That's not the same thing as where research takes place.
Yeah, well, but why are we paying more than Canadians are, and we're doing the research in the United States of America?
Because we don't have price controls, I guess, and they do. Seth Denson, that may be too simplistic an answer.
No, you're spot on, Jim. Canada does have socialized medicine, and so as such, they have price controls and set prices. And there are companies. There's a company called CannaRx that's out there that will actually drop ship drugs to the United States. I want to disclaimer: I'm not endorsing them. I'm just saying that they're out there. And we're seeing more and more of that, where American citizens are finding ways to get drugs mailed to them at a lower cost than they would get at a local pharmacy. And now, this isn't all drugs. There are certain things that people can get, but we are seeing more and more of that. And this was all part of it's much easier to do because of NAFTA and some other things that we don't have time to get into. But Rob is right that we are seeing more of that. That doesn't mean that drug wasn't originally developed here in the United States. and just sold, and now it may be on a patent release in Canada and can be shipped back. A lot of times, though, this is the interesting part of that. A lot of times a drug will be manufactured here in the United States, sold to a company in Canada who has price controls, who then turns around and sells it back. And that's just an interesting way around, or a loophole that many have found to get through the price system.
Yeah. I have to ask you the most important thing you want us to remember from this discussion tonight in terms of how we personally approach the cost of health care.
Yeah, the most important thing I would tell consumers is and listeners is to do your due diligence. Solving healthcare in the United States, it seems like a behemoth problem, but it really does start just like most other things from a grassroots level. And there's not all things that we can control as citizens, but we can ask questions. We can demand answers. We talked about some regulatory things that we should be calling our congressmen and saying this is not acceptable, and we should do it. And unfortunately, until we personally have an issue, we oftentimes won't do that. But once we've had that issue, it's too late. And so what I would tell your listeners is be engaged, be informed, get information, listen to Jim's show and the people that he has on, and do your job to be a better citizen and a better consumer when it comes to health care.
All right. Very good. 1-866-50-JIMBO, our number, and always a pleasure to have a chance to talk with Seth Denson, president and co-founder of GDP Advisors.com. And more of the Bohannon Show follows very shortly. Stay on the line, Seth. We'll speak off air. I'm Jim Bohannon, and this is Westwood One.